How much time do you have to kind of make that moral decision?
It's split second. You could be guiding a weapon into a target, and all of a sudden a non-combatant comes into the screen, and you have to divert the weapon away because it's now not something that you should do.
Welcome to an inspirational people interview on the Share Life podcast. I'm Jason Scott Montoya, and today I'm speaking with Air Force Major General retired Jack Briggs, a specialist in high stakes decision making and crisis management. Jack, say hello.
Hello, and Jason, thanks a lot for this. I've been looking forward to it.
Jack is a client, and he's also a referral from a mutual connection, Voices to Connect. And they help public speakers like Jack give their vision a voice. Jack has spent 3 decades as a senior military leader in the Air Force. He served as a fighter pilot in combat, flying 225 combat missions across multiple operations, including Desert Storm, Enduring Freedom, and Iraqi Freedom. His leadership expanded to commanding squadrons and wings, and he ultimately achieved the rank of Major General. His roles included NATO staff positions, serving as executive officer to the Supreme Allied Commander Europe, and leading the 455th Air Expeditionary Wing at Bagram Airfield in Afghanistan, where he oversaw operations for thousands of warfighters. Jack now consults with organizational leaders in complex situations and critical environments. He works with the government leaders, executive leaders, university leaders, and nonprofit leaders to make the right choices when no easy answers exist. Jack, tell us who you are in your own words. Where do you come from? Tell us about your story.
Well, like I said, Jason, thank you very much for the opportunity to be with you and the help that you've given me as I've ventured into this area of trying to help other people deal with those hardest decisions that they have to make. Where to start? I grew up in a great family, had a great childhood. Can't complain at all about that.
Where did you grow up?
My father was in the Army. We had a couple of different places, but I ended up finishing out in Northern California.
Okay.
Before I went to the Air Force Academy, where I graduated, and then I became a pilot in the Air Force. I spent my 30 plus years in the Air Force, advancing in rank and responsibility.
Now I had to pause you real quick because your dad was in the Army. What happened there? Like, why'd you switch over?
Well, when I was 8 years old, I saw the Thunderbirds fly.
Oh,
And I asked
okay.
my dad about that. I said, "What do you think?" And he said, "Well, that's a great idea if that's what you'd like to do. Don't turn the Army down or any of that." And I didn't want to be a professional camper, which is kind of what the Army does. They're out there camping professionally. And I don't mean that in any disrespectful kind of way. The Army is the bread and butter of the defense of the nation. But I wanted to be a pilot. I wanted to be a fighter pilot from the time I was a very, very young person. And so I spent my growing up years pointed towards getting to the Air Force Academy so that I could go out and be a pilot, because I understood that if I went to the Air Force Academy, I had my best chance to do that.
Okay.
So I ended up going to the Air Force Academy, spent my time in the Air Force, loved every opportunity, lived in 7 different overseas locations. All of my kids were born overseas. Just an incredible experience. When I retired, I was looking around at something I wanted to do, and I really did want to do something different. And I ended up getting pointed in the direction of higher education. I ended up getting hired at New York University as my first foray after the military, where I did security and safety. I was the vice president for global resiliency and security for NYU's 15 campuses in 11 countries at the time. I did take a short break. I was asked if I would help out with a gospel rescue mission in Colorado Springs. I had had a connection with this rescue mission before I had left the military. They were looking for a new CEO, and my wife and I and my family prayerfully considered it, and we thought it was the right thing to do. So I took about a 4-year sabbatical from higher ed to be the CEO of a rescue mission in Colorado Springs. And then as that was kind of winding down, I thought, what do I want to do next? I enjoyed higher ed very much, and so I had the opportunity to join the University of Colorado in Boulder as the associate vice chancellor for public safety operations, and that's where I am today.
Let's tease some of these pieces out here. So you've flown in 225 combat missions. Well, tell us about the first time you ever got in a jet. Like, what was that like? I mean, our experience as laymen is watching Tom Cruise ride in the back of, an F-16 or something.
I will tell you that it was a boyhood dream come true, and the combination of excitement and adrenaline and dread, boy, this is really what it's like, was just unmatched. And from that time on, I loved every minute of it.
Yeah. How old were you when you got to ride the first time?
The very first time I was in, so I would have been 21. I had
Okay.
graduated from the Air Force Academy and went to pilot training. The Air
Yeah.
Force puts you in jets right off the bat. And
Yeah.
so I was in jets by the time I was 21.
Okay. I went, what was the year? 2006 or 7. I went to Paris Island, which is the Marine Corps training facility.
Uh-huh.
And they actually have a couple fighter jets themselves. So they took us to the hangar and we got to see the jets in person and talk to them. And they talked about like the fighter pilots are the young ones. They're like just right in their early 20s. And so, what is it about the youngness that is unique to being a fighter pilot that when you get older, it just isn't viable?
It's a very athletic activity,
Mm.
is I would say the first thing is you need some physical resilience. You need some strength and physical resilience to fly a fighter. You're put under a lot of physical pressure as you're flying it with when you pull G's, you have to work against those. And it can be very stressful. The other thing is reaction time.
Hmm.
It's a very fast reaction. And so as you get older, your reactions slow down a little bit.
Mm,
Fortunately, you compensate with experience,
yeah.
but at some point that balance gets out of balance enough that you're no longer really at your best when you're flying
Okay.
as an older pilot. You're great because of your experience, and that's how you continue to be able to do that. It really is a young person's game.
Yeah. So, when you did these 225 missions, like what span of time does this take place in?
Well, I started off in Desert Storm, so that had been in 1991, and my last combat sortie was in 2011. So it
Okay.
was 20 years.
Okay. And did the type of missions you did throughout them, were they all similar or did they change as you got older?
The technology advanced significantly from my first combat sortie in Desert Storm, but the concepts and the idea of what you're doing did not. And I mean, you had a very specific mission to either support the army or to do a activity that was deep inside maybe intimate enemy territory to accomplish a mission. All of
Hmm.
that is based on the concepts of teamwork, trust between your fellow pilots, the maintenance people that work on the airplanes, the folks that are observing the battlefield. You have air battle managers. It's a very much a team effort, and that never changes. The technology gets slicker, but it takes courage, it takes fortitude, it takes trust, it takes integrity to do those things because you're never alone in any of those situations. You're always relying on the team.
Yeah. So, what type of like when you're flying a mission like this, what is it like as a pilot? Because you're in a jet, you're probably super high up. I don't know what kind of anti-air these, there were in Iraq at the time, but like, what's the experience like? Is it mostly cruise control, or is it pretty intense the whole time?
There are times of absolute boredom that surround absolute intense action. I'll
Hmm.
just say that. But when you're in the middle of it, your training kicks in. That's
Mm,
We train and train and train because in those environments you have to be ready and you can't let your emotions get the better of you. Just like in decision making today, that I help leaders understand is you have to control your emotions. You have to rely on your training, which means you have to do stuff before the events happen
mm,
so that when something does happen, training kicks in and you start to take action based on that training. When
mm.
you do that and your team members do the same, you really become a cohesive unit that can accomplish a lot.
Yeah.
So when you're getting shot at or you're in a situation like that, your training absolutely is what carries you through that.
Yeah. And what are some of the emotions that you feel when you're going through these missions? Like, is it fear? Is it excitement? Is it
I
dread?
think
Is it?
I think the biggest one is you don't want to let others down. You really are focused on doing your very best because you may be the only person doing that particular role that everybody else is counting on.
Yeah.
And particularly as
Mm,
the fighter pilot, if we were attacking somebody or something deep into enemy territory, the maintenance people, the administrative people, the people that got us gas, the loaders of our weapons, the planners of the missions, they're all doing their part. But in the very end, it's me making sure that the target gets attacked correctly and
mm,
legally and all of those. And so all that pressure comes onto you, and you have to trust that all those other folks have done their very best so that when it's your time,
mm.
you're going to do your very best as part of the team. So I guess the weight is that you don't want to, the weight on you is you don't want to let others down.
Yeah. So out of that tension of not wanting to let them down, what you're saying is if you act that out, you might actually let them down if you don't then rely on your training, right? Because you'll do things out of that emotional desire that it might actually create that outcome. Is that what you're
Correct.
saying?
Yeah,
Okay.
you can actually end up failing in the mission
Mhm.
if you don't stick to the plan.
When you're going on a mission like that, how much do you know about the mission itself, the target, why you're attacking it, versus what's withheld from you based on maybe the confidentiality, the security, or a variety of other factors?
It would be incredibly rare for someone not to know the reason that they were attacking a target. Part of
Okay.
that is because every target gets vetted
Mhm.
for legal. Is it a lawful target? So we're
Mhm.
not going after something that is illegal, and that means you as the pilot understanding what your parameters are, because there are times when you could see the target, but there were civilians in the area, and you had to make a judgment call and say, "I'm not going to attack the target." Even though
Mhm.
all this work has happened, you've put all that effort to get to that moment. In that moment, you see that it's not safe for others that are not combatants. And so
Mhm.
you have a legal responsibility and a moral responsibility not to attack the target. And
Yeah.
that doesn't mean that mistakes don't happen. And sometimes you don't see those collateral issues, but if you do, you're responsible for making sure. So you do need to know what the targets are and why they are a valid target, so that you don't do something that's immoral.
Yeah. And how much time do you have to kind of make that moral decision?
It's a split second call.
Okay, so you're talking just moments.
It's split second. You could be guiding a weapon into a target, and all of a sudden, a non-combatant comes into to the uh, to the screen, and you have
Mhm.
to divert the weapon away because
Mm,
it's now not something that you should do.
yeah. And so how do you reconcile that dynamic? Like, because I imagine you're in situations where you have to make that decision and you make it and you're able to divert it, and other times where maybe there's not enough time. Like, how do you reconcile those situations?
You have to uh, look at your motivation first of all. Are you trying to do something just? If you are, and a mistake happens, a mistake is different than a crime. A mistake is something that happens due to a variety of different circumstances. It could be weather, it could be the wind, it could be something like I just described, that it was too late to change the direction of the weapon, and there's nothing you could do.
Yeah.
But the time that you made the decision to do what you were going to do, it was the right decision. But the
Hmm.
outcomes often are affected by things that you can't control. Just like when you're making decisions in a crisis situation, the focus should be on, did I make the right decision at the time? Was I
Hmm.
using, here's something that I like to talk about when I talk with the leaders about decision making. How do I know that I'm making the best decision I can at that time? And there's three things. The first is, am I making the decision based on principles? Am I not trying to make a decision based on emotion? The second thing is, am I humble enough to ask people for help? Do I bring others into the conversation if I can, that will help me to make the best principled decision that I can make? But the third thing is, I have to be decisive. I have to be decisive as the leader or the pilot. I have to make a decision. Making no decision typically is the worst thing. Even if you err in your decision, if it was principled and you were humble enough to ask for others for help if you could, and you make that decisive decision, that is more defendable just in your own heart, let alone legally. But
Yeah.
in your own heart, I made the right decision at the time with what I had. Now, the outcome can be affected by a variety of different things, and you want to make sure that you adjust if you can to
Hmm.
those things that affected the outcome. But your real litmus test for how well you did in that moment is as at the decision.
Yeah. So you mentioned the term legally. So what do you mean by that, and where does that come from, and what makes it legal or not?
So there's the laws of armed conflict. Those are international laws that describe what legal targets are. Typically,
Mhm.
they are combatants, meaning they are engaged in combat, or they are adjacent to combat, meaning they supply combat, they supply the enemy. Those can be legal targets as well. But there's a body of law that talks about just war, and these are all very well established international norms for what is considered to be just and what is considered to be legal. And again, it goes back to those decisions that you're making at the time with the information that you had. The second guessing of those in a legal forum may be valid, but you would you would always go back to, was it a legal decision when you made it?
Yeah. So, what would you say to someone that was like, well, you're in a war, you're fighting each other. Why should you follow any legal guidelines? What's the point?
I believe that there is a limit to what is justified in war. I personally believe that. I believe that non-combatants are not targets, and in today's warfare, that is difficult because you have enemy that are interspersed with civilians. You have technology that can fail. There's a lot of factors. So you want a structure that outlines what is legal and just, because you would not want the enemy to have no limits on their attacking civilians. When
Hmm.
they attack civilians, that's terrorism. That's not that's not warfare. That's
Yeah.
legal criminal behavior. And unfortunately, you will have collateral damage. You will,
Yeah.
but it can't be your primary target.
Yeah. So I think when we look across the globe and in the situation we're in the current era, a lot of those laws and norms are starting to deteriorate pretty rapidly. What are your thoughts about that?
It's first of all, anytime you get into armed conflict with another state, organization, individual, something's failed before you got there. The norms of diplomacy, the norms of conflict resolution have failed. So warfare should be your last resort. You should be looking at diplomatic, information, economic, different levers of power to try to avoid
Mm.
conflict, because armed conflict means we're down to no other option,
Mhm.
essentially. And as these norms deteriorate, we lower the bar of where conflict seems to be the right answer.
Mhm.
And that's
Mhm.
unfortunate. It should
Yeah.
be the diplomats are the ones who are at the forefront, not the military.
Yeah. So when you think about just all of these combat missions that you flew across Desert Storm, Enduring Freedom, Iraq, like what were kind of some of your big takeaways that you then carried into the next stage of your career?
Just like I said, teamwork,
Mm.
the fact that you can rely on people. If you give them the opportunity and the training, if you give them the skill set to be a part of the team, people
Mhm.
respond to that. Absolutely. They want to be a contributor. I often say that no one wakes up in the morning to be and says, I'm going to be a jerk today.
Yeah.
They typically wake up and they're like, what can I do today that's going to be good?
Yeah. So what was it like to be on the other side of you when now you're working with the pilot, not the pilot? How did that experience play out for you? Not having the control, maybe.
As a commander,
Yeah.
absolutely
Yeah.
trust in these young. So I'm in my 50s, and I'm speaking with those 22-year-olds who are now responsible, and trust in the training that they've had, not giving them too much responsibility at first to
Yeah.
have to make the most gut-wrenching decisions if we don't have to, but knowing that if they're put in those situations, they've been trained for them. And if they're not trained for them, they shouldn't be in them. So it was,
Mm.
and again, your responsibility changes as a commander from when you were just, not just, but the pilot or the person on the ground. Your responsibility now is to try to make sure that all of those things that I just talked about are put together. The teamwork, the
Mhm.
reviews of legality, all of those become something that you're responsible for.
Okay. So, as a commander, you were the executive officer to the Supreme Allied Commander Europe. What in the world is that?
So the Supreme Allied Commander of Europe is the military general responsible for NATO. So NATO has two parts to it. It has a political arm and it has a military arm. And the
Mhm.
military arm is commanded by the Supreme Allied Commander of Europe. The
Okay.
the military is all about acronyms. So SACEUR,
Okay.
Supreme Allied Commander Europe, SACEUR.
Yeah.
Very first SACEUR was General Eisenhower, basically World War II. He
Okay.
was the Supreme Allied Commander of Europe.
Mhm.
So there have been generations of general officers and admirals that have been responsible for that position. And my job as the executive officer is I guess the easiest way to describe it is like I was the personal chief of staff. I made sure that his aides, travel, policy, all of that got vetted. SACEUR is a equivalent to a head of state in terms of meeting with individuals in Europe. So we would meet with heads of state of NATO nations and non-NATO nations
Okay.
to work through policies, collaboration. It was a great time. It was a very challenging.
What years was that for you?
I was there from 2007 ish to 2009.
Okay. So, I mean, there's a lot of talk about NATO, particularly in the last decade. What would you want people to know about NATO itself and its role that maybe is underappreciated or people don't know?
So NATO is really a wonder. It's brought together nations that have been in conflict with each other before and continue to have relationships that sometimes are awkward, but under the banner of NATO, we cooperate and we
Mhm.
can achieve many things. So I consider it to be an absolute positive international organization for collaboration and for presenting a united front when we consider threats that are out there.
Yeah. So, is the person that's in the role that you were in, like in regards to the whole situation with Russia invading Ukraine, like, is that a big part of their role now?
It
Is
is.
that conflict
It
specifically?
is. That's firmly in the job jar of NATO and SACEUR. So,
Okay.
in fact, when I was in the role, Russia had just invaded Georgia. And so we were trying to understand what the response was going to be. And again, the diplomats got involved and they were able to prevent something that would have been horrific conflict between NATO and Russia. We need to be careful about that even today. But we also have to stand up for the principles of what's right amongst nations. What is
Yeah.
behavior amongst nations?
When you were the 450 Air Expeditionary Wing at the Bagram Airfield, what was that like? Are you actually in Afghanistan when you're
Mhm.
doing that? So the whole time, and then what's that role look like?
So I had multiple roles. I was a pilot, so I flew
Okay.
combat missions, just like
Okay, so you actually were flying combat when you were there.
they're just
Oh,
like the
okay.
young guys.
Okay.
But thankfully, I was more experienced, so I had
Yeah.
experience to rely, as we talked about earlier. But my role and responsibility really was to have oversight of safety and security, mission accomplishment, logistical support for essentially the northern part of Afghanistan. There was an equivalent base in southern Afghanistan at the same time that I was there that generally had responsible for what was going on in the south. And so Bagram was that key base or out of which all these operations would occur, whether they were flight operations or ground operations that were out in different parts of Afghanistan. So my
Mhm.
job was to make sure that we had the platform of Bagram, and that it was safe and secure, that we flew missions out of there to support not only air issues, but ground issues mostly, and then the logistical support for all of the operations.
And did you also interface or train with any of the Afghan government military?
So we had partnerships with the Afghan military, the Afghan security services, the Afghan police as we attempted to execute operations in Afghanistan.
Yeah. So what years were you in Afghanistan?
10 to 11.
Okay, so only a year. Okay.
Yeah, it's about 13, 14 months that you're there.
What came after Afghanistan?
I went back to the big Air Force and I went to Winnipeg, Canada as
Okay.
right. I was the uh, deputy commander for the Canadian NORAD region, the North American Aerospace Defense Command. It's the
Okay.
command that defends the skies over Canada and the United States. And we have this wonderful relationship with Canada when it comes to NORAD. In Canada, there's a general officer that's Canadian that's responsible for that airspace, but the deputy is an American. In the United States, the commander of the area in the United States is a American general and their deputy is a Canadian. So we kind of trade.
Okay. You're obviously American, but you've interacted with all these different countries and you've had to, work with them and understand where they're coming from and collaborate. Like what did that teach you? What leadership insight did that give you to have that kind of larger point of view perspective? Because often we're like, I'm in my house, I'm in my city, and here you are like at the global level. So help us understand that.
I think you have to have some cultural intelligence when you work with different cultures. You can't just mirror what you think a Western or a U.S. perspective is on someone else. You have
Hmm.
to listen. You have to talk. You have to be able to understand where they're coming from because they may have very different mindsets about basic things, individual rights, collective rights. What's in the art of the possible? So the
Hmm.
U.S. has just a lot of resources. Some of the nations that we worked with had almost none,
Hmm.
and you have to come to them where they're at, and you can't just kind of demand that they meet you where you're at because there's no way they can. And
Hmm.
so, how do you integrate their capabilities, which are unique strengths? How do you
Yeah.
integrate those strengths into the team so that not only just do they feel a part of the team, but they're actually contributors in a very important way? And we're generally able to do that. So you have to have this cultural intelligence. You also have to be willing to, I don't want to say disagree, but at least have harder conversations
Hmm.
uh, in a constructive way.
Yeah.
Because if you just placate someone, they know it, and
Mm.
that's not, if you're condescending or if you are dismissive, they're going to know that, and you undermine the relationship. But
Okay.
when you look at them and say, look, I know we've got this and you've got that, and how can we make these things work together and be contributors to in both directions? But sometimes you gotta have the harder conversation to do that. And
Yeah.
having some diplomacy and the ability to do that, I think, is a very important skill.
Yeah. So you ended up shifting into education. Why didn't you just retire and go live in Hawaii? What happened to you?
I It was super clear that my wife not ready for me to just hang around the house. I had 5 different year-long deployments. I have 3
Three
kids. They
kids.
were all born in Europe. She's a very independent, super awesome lady, and I don't think she would have wanted me hanging around the house too much. She's got her
Yeah.
own feng shui that she does, and she's great at it. She's the best logistician I ever knew. We moved we've moved 21 times, and she's been in
Wow.
charge of that move. She's been in charge of every move because she does the logistics for it. So that's what
So
she should.
what advice would she give us about how to effectively move?
Well, I think it's all about information management. How do you gather information early? How do you make a plan? She's a
Yeah.
great planner when it comes to that kind of stuff. And then how do you execute that plan? Just fabulous. And so
Yeah.
we been married 38 years, and she's been awesome. But I think I would have disrupted the feng shui in her house if I'd have been just hanging around.
Yeah.
I started looking around, and I had some opportunities to do some different things, but I was really attracted to the concept of higher education. I have 3 masters and a doctorate, and I like higher ed.
Yeah. What are your degrees in?
Let's see. So I have one in international relations, I have one in international economics, and I have one in strategic studies. And then my
Okay.
doctorate is in education, leadership, and innovation. Think
Mm,
organizational behavioral theory is kind of really where it's at, and that's from New
yeah.
York University.
Okay. So is the rescue mission the first thing that you do? Do I
Nope,
have that
I
right
went to
or no?
higher ed first, and I went to
Oh,
New York University. I went to NYU.
okay.
I was there about 4 years, and then I got this phone call. I had been
Okay.
on the board of directors of this rescue mission in Colorado Springs in my last assignment in the military, and
Okay.
the then CEO wanted to retire, and they were looking around for someone that they thought might be a good person for the to fill in that role next. The board of directors called me, prayerfully considered it with my wife and my family, and we thought it's probably something that God's asking me to do. I probably should have an answer, and the answer was yes. And so we went back to Colorado Springs from New York, and I was the CEO of the rescue mission for about 4 years.
Okay. So I want to ask you about that. But before I do, you've moved, you said 19 times? 21. And you have 3 kids.
Yes,
What advice do you have for parents that move their kids a lot? Because that's, I imagine, rough on kids.
yeah, I would say it is. Their therapists say that they're resilient, and they are. All 3 of them are incredibly resilient, and they're very self-initiators. They can handle themselves, and
Okay.
I think part of that was these experiences that they had.
Mm,
There are certainly downsides to it. I'm not trying to downplay that at all. They had a hard time keeping friends because, of course, they changed every 2 or 3 years, sometimes even faster than that. And so, I think that their experience was enriching, but it was also very, very challenging.
yeah.
And that's a sacrifice that military family and military spouses and military children bear that is often not understood very well outside of the military community.
Yeah. So you go to this rescue mission. This related to the homelessness type stuff? Yes, in your book. Okay.
So I did write a book. It's a um, meeting homelessness with hope. So the world of homelessness gets a lot of attention. And when I had been on the board, and then when I was the CEO, it really became a passion for me to understand. I don't want to say all the causes because there's so many.
Uh,
If you meet a person, if you meet 1,000 homeless people, you've met 1,000 reasons, right? They do have some context maybe around mental health. Sometimes it's about poverty. Sometimes it's about addiction. But how they got into those are all individual stories.
Mm.
So to try to say we're going to end homelessness, anybody, a politician, a nonprofit, anybody that says they're going to end homelessness is being a little Pollyannish, right? There are just
Yeah.
reasons that it happens. So what do we do to help people that are in that situation? Well, the first thing is if we can keep them from going homeless in the first place, that's the best bet. And so what does that look like? Sometimes that looks like government assistance at some level.
Mm.
I would say that government assistance at the dependency level is too much, but
Mhm.
government assistance at the inspirational level is a good thing
Yeah.
because it helps to either keep them from maybe losing a job or an apartment, uh, and it could be the difference of a couple $100,
Mhm.
honestly,
Yeah.
that keeps somebody from going homeless.
Mhm.
Because once they go homeless, it's a different game,
Yeah.
and now we've got a lot more. We've got to pour a lot more resources into it.
Okay.
So that's the first thing. If you can devise ways to keep people from going homeless, but once that happens, there's really three things that are core to how you address this. Can you guess what the number one question I would get when I was the CEO of the rescue mission?
Why can't they get a job?
Okay, that is one of them, right?
Okay.
The number one question I would get is, "Hey Jack, when I pull up to the stoplight and someone has a sign, what am I
Mm.
supposed to do?" Number one question, without just absolutely. And my answer to them was, "I understand. I understand why you're asking me that question. That question is driven by guilt. You see someone who you perceive to have less than you, and you feel compassion or empathy. And so you're like, what do I do? Right? And so the answer to your question is, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you stop and give them $5 or if you just ignore them. I say that and it sounds like I'm being not compassionate. But the truth of the matter is that when you are at that light, regardless of what you do, you are not going to change their long-term situation. You're not engaged long enough. What you're doing is you're placating your own guilt. You are doing
Mhm.
something to assuage your own guilt. And that's okay. I'm not saying don't do that. I'm just saying realize where it's coming from. But you can do what I do. And I do this today. If I see somebody on the street corner and I'm pull up in my car and the light is turned red, I roll my window down and I say, "Hey, what's your name?" They look at me and I'm like, "Yeah, what's your name?" And maybe they give you the street name of Candy or Sugar or Caveman or Cowboy. They all have street names to protect themselves. I say, "No,
Mm.
no, 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 no. My name's Jack. What's your name?" More often than not, they tell me Thomas. I'm like, "Hi, Thomas. It's nice to meet you. Try to have a safe day. If you don't know what to do, go to the rescue mission. They can help with food, clothing, shelter. Just
Mm.
go there. Take a step. About then, the light's going to change, right? And you can say, 'Take care, Thomas. Roll your window up. Look in the rearview mirror. They're staring at your car.' Here's why. For the most part, people on the street, no one ever asks them their name, ever.
Mm.
In fact, they haven't said their real name maybe in years. They haven't said their real name out loud. They've been Caveman and not Thomas. This is the first step, and it's a transaction because people on the street they feel out of control. They're not in control of anything. And all of a sudden, you're giving them the opportunity to be in control of something, to be in a conversation, in a transactional conversation. I gave you something, I gave you my name, and you're going to do something back. Maybe you're going to give me your name. And that transaction is equals because whose name is better, Jack or Thomas? They're the same. And so you've created a moment of equality with someone who rarely feels like they are equal to anything. That's a very powerful moment. The first one is transactions. The second is incentivization. You get more of what you incentivize. So back to the street corner. If I give somebody $5 on the street corner, let's just say that they are out there and they get $50 that day. 10 people give them $5. The next morning, when they wake up and they're like, "I would like more money and some stuff," what do you think they're going to do?
More of what worked for them.
Exactly. They're going to go right back to that street corner. Instead, so they're going to get a measly $5 from you. When if they went to a service provider like a rescue mission, they would get help. They would get real help. Maybe help for the voices in their head. Maybe help for the addiction that is keeping them from thriving at all. Maybe help from the abuse that they're experiencing on the street, particularly for women. Women on the street, it is nothing short of horrific.
Yeah.
So getting them to not be incentivized to go to the street corner, but to go somewhere else for help. is important. The third one is partnerships. There is no service provider that can solve all the problems. There is not one that's an easy button. Remember, I said that there's 1,000 stories for 1,000 homeless people? You have to figure out, where does the help come from?
Mhm.
And it comes from a variety of different places. It could be that the initial place is the rescue mission for someone, but maybe they've got kids, and maybe your rescue mission doesn't support children. It's a different problem set than adult homeless. So,
Mm.
but maybe there is something in town that does that for children.
Yeah.
Salvation Army, something else. You need to have partnerships as the rescue mission or the service provider to empower those other organizations to work with you.
Yeah.
And that can be difficult. Now, most rescue missions are gospel oriented. And there's a lot of organizations out there that do not like the idea of a gospel rescue mission. They like the idea of the rescue mission, they just don't like the gospel part.
Yeah.
And so I would meet people who were trying to support homeless people and say, why don't you work with us? Jack, I like what you guys do, but that whole faith thing is just not for me and my
Mm.
organization. I'm like, okay, let me ask you this question. Do you think people have worth? 100% of the time, people say yes. I say, you know what? I agree with you. Now, we can debate on where we think that worth comes from. I will tell you that I firmly believe it comes from the fact that the creator of the universe chose to die for just you. If there had been no one else on the planet, that creator chose to die for just you. Same for that homeless person. That's where I think their worth comes from. So I have a pretty high bar for this. Now, you may come up with another reason that you believe they have worth. I will not challenge that. Instead, let's just agree that they have worth. Can we do something together for someone who has worth? Almost always. People are like, Jack, when you phrase it that way, I think we can try. When we try together, guess what happens? They look at us and say, you know what? You gospel people aren't so bad. And I say to them, you know what? You're not so bad either. Let's see more of this.
Yeah.
It's those three things together. And I could go into all kinds of detail about this, but that's what our book was about.
Okay. So tell people about the book if they want to dive in deeper. What's the name of it? How do they get
It's
it?
called Meeting Homelessness with Hope. And there's a box full of them just over my lips, my
Just
left shoulder right there. I won't go grab it, but it's on Amazon, Jack Briggs, and you'll see it on there. And it describes just these things that I just talked about. And we tried to be as truthful as possible about the statistics and what seems to work and what doesn't work, because there are a lot of stories out there that are just not true. They're
Mhm.
driven by virtue, like empathy, but they're not true. They don't help the way people think they would, because they
Yeah.
don't understand the dynamic of someone who is in extreme poverty or extreme addiction or
Yeah.
extreme abuse. They just don't get it.
So, how do we help people to see the inner homeless person in themselves that they're not seeing?
Very true that in a lot of cases, you are one or two catastrophic disasters away from not having anything. Like I said, being having that moment of equality with someone who's on the street is myth shattering. I have seen it happen more than you can, more than you can imagine. Someone's on the street, they're acting a little crazy, they're loud, or they're rocking back and forth, or they've got a sign and they're doing all of this stuff. And I look at them in the eye and I say, what's your name? And they look at me and yeah, my name's Jack. What's your name? All of that disappears. Their tone changes, their demeanor changes, their willingness to say something to you that's not crazy changes, because all of a sudden they are being seen by someone as a person. And if that reflected energy doesn't come back to you, I don't know who you are,
Yeah.
because that positive reflected energy will help you understand that it's more complicated than just the $5 a water bottle that you're going to give them.
Yeah.
Something beyond that.
And I think for you, there's also the dynamic, which is you don't want to just placate yourself and make yourself feel better. You want to actually solve the problem.
I do.
Yeah.
I do. There are some folks, no, there's a virtue to it that they enjoy.
Yeah.
And that's it.
So, like, yeah.
I like
So
them
I
as
think
community.
they can feel good about giving money to you to help solve to actually solve the problem.
Exactly.
So on that note, like when you think about living better, that's a great. I feel like there's a foundation there to kind of inspire the answer to that question.
Yes, what is living better? Living better. That's what you're asking me is what
Yeah,
is living better?
yeah.
I think it's a life of integrity. And when I mean integrity here, it's not just saying the truth and, living that. Integrity is a word that comes from being integrated, an integer. And what that is a whole number. It's a whole, right? There's no fractions. It's an integer. It's integrated. It's whole. And how do we how do we build an integrated life? I think it really starts off with having some spiritual element. I think you have to have physical integrity. I think you have to have emotional integrity. And I think you have to have relational integrity. I think all four of those are required to be integrated. You can have an emphasis in one of those four, but if any of the four are lacking, you are not integrated. And that
Would
creates a tough life.
Well, how do you feel about me using the word that if you're not whole in one of those areas, that part of you is corrupting?
It can be. It can be. So physical health could be prayerfully considering a better life. You could feel dominant in your emotional roles in life. You could even have some relationships. But if you're an addict, and it will corrupt those other things eventually.
Mhm,
Your marriage and your family will go away. Your emotions will become uncontrolled.
mhm,
Your spiritual life will deteriorate, and you will
mhm.
be focused just on your addiction. So in that particular case, I would agree. Same thing emotionally. If your emotional balance is starting to be out of balance, it's going to hurt those things too. And so, yes, it can be corrupting.
In our society, in the era that I've grown up in, I'm 40 now, particularly the 90s, early 2000s, with, there's some kind of milestone moments to sort of slowly have changed things. But it was a mostly peaceful experience, positive and peaceful. And I think a lot of times we can attribute our goodness to ourselves when it's the context we're in. And if we had been in a different context, we might not be as good as we think we are. So what would you say about that dynamic?
I think we have images of what good environment is, and I don't want to downplay that there aren't positive elements of good environment. But I have seen people overcome the worst environments you could possibly imagine. In fact, I don't believe you can imagine them. Unless you've been exposed to them, I don't believe you can imagine them. And they've overcome them. Now, how? It's not just luck. It's not just luck. It's being integrated. It's having hope. It's having a support system, that relational support system that helps at the right time in the right way. Because all of us, let me put it
Mhm.
this way, none of us is built to solve every problem. There's just you think you can, but none of us is built to solve every problem. And so having those relational factors in your life to be held accountable, to support, to
Yeah.
be a cheerleader or to be a butt kicker sometimes. And
Yeah.
I do believe that there are certain circumstances that are just so horrific that it doesn't surprise me that someone is in the worst situation. They
Yeah.
were dealt the worst hand from day one as a
Mhm.
kid in ways that, again, unless you've been exposed to it, you cannot imagine it. And it is no wonder that just to stop the pain of the memories, they become addicted, right? And so we can't downplay that at all. It's not just like, hey, buck up and try harder.
Mhm.
That's not true, right? But we have to recognize that, and there is hope. There is redemption. There is the ability to slowly, slowly move away from that.
Yeah. How does mentoring play a role in that?
Mentoring is such a great tool because mentoring is a two-way street. That's the thing about mentoring is it's a two-way street if it's done right. You have some mentor who is working with a mentee in some way. I mean, you're my mentor. You're my mentor when it comes to this websites and and all of that technique and that kind of stuff. But I wonder if in our conversations and in our relationships, as your mentee, I wonder if I haven't reflected energy back to you that you've taken and said, hey, I'm going to hold on to that. And that's just something else for me. I'm going to put that in my bucket. And when done well, when you have a healthy mentor mentee relationship, sometimes it switches
Yeah.
just a little bit. Sometimes it switches a little bit, right? And there are multiple times that as a mentor, as I'm talking to these young mentees, I'm like, ooh, that's good.
Yeah.
I'm writing that down because I'm learning, right?
Mhm.
And so these mentorships, when done right, are part of that relational growth.
Yeah. And I think another layer there that strikes me is, and that ties to what you're saying about someone in that really dark environment or context. The word that comes to mind is forsaken. Like knowing I'm not alone, because the despair, it can overcome us. What are your thoughts on that?
I'll get emotional if I'm not careful here,
Yeah.
because I have seen that very thing. I've seen men and women that come to the rescue mission hard addicted, but they're done with that life. You can't change that life until you make a personal choice. I'm not going to do it anymore, but I don't know how. It's
Hmm.
not just gutting it out. Addiction is too hard. Mental health is too hard to just gut it out yourself. And so they come to the rescue mission, they get in one of the programs, and 18 months later they graduate and they're clean and they are back with their family. And we would have these graduation ceremonies and they would invite their friends, and there's a mentor that's assigned to them when they first come
Yeah.
in. And the mentor gets up and speaks, and I would typically get up and speak, and they would say something about how their life has been transformed. We're a gospel rescue mission. Part of the secret sauce for us is that faith, coming to faith if they don't have it, or reestablishing that faith if they walked away from it. That's
Hmm.
our thing. But I always watch the moms. They will invite
Hmm.
their mom. I'm going to get emotional probably. I watch the moms, and the moms can't speak. They can't talk. There are no words for what this mother is experiencing at that moment, because their son, I'm just using a son in this particular case, disappeared. The kid that they raised disappeared, went off and did things that they just couldn't imagine, went to prison, addicted,
Yeah.
abusive, all of the things that it's like, that can't be my kid. And all of a sudden they're back. Their boy, their young man, their son is back, and they can't speak. They are beyond grateful. It's the love of a mother that is the closest thing I can think of to the love of Christ on this planet, to see that, because they would have done anything, and I mean anything, to save their son from the misery that they were in. And now they're back. If you, again, when you see it and you experience it, you can't help but be changed by that.
Yeah, and it's a pretty striking image that when Jesus is on the cross, his disciples have all left, and his mom is there at the foot of the cross.
She never gave up. She couldn't. That's the thing. The love of a mother is to never give up. Now, there are situations and there are relationships where that happens. And that's one of the tragedies of eternity. I just don't know how to describe it. But the overwhelming majority of mothers they're beyond what I can describe. I love my kids. I would walk in front of a bus for my kids, but I can't match my wife's love of our kids. I just can't. I
Yeah.
want to, but I can't.
Yeah. So, how have stories and narratives played a role in your life? How have they shaped you? Is there any particular ones, fictional or real, that have shaped
I
you?
would say that stories are people's lives when they're authentic, right? When you learn somebody's story, you are giving them some agency in their life.
How so?
Well, because you're listening and you're learning and they're telling you about themselves. Sometimes it's horrifying. Sometimes it's uplifting, but you're, you're learning about another person through their stories. It's not a
Mhm.
mathematical equation. It's not a recipe. It's dirty and it's hard. But when you get to hear people's stories, they come to life, right? People come to
Mhm.
life when you hear their stories. You were talking about seeing them, your inner homeless person, if you will, but I would say it's more you're seeing them as not the homeless person,
Mm,
right?
something more than that.
So much more. One of the arguments that I make with some people who are just like, "Hey, Jack, that's their choice. They want to live on the street." Like, you know what? I don't think that's true. Yeah, there's probably a few people who've just dropped out of society and they just don't want to be bothered. The vast majority of people, this is not their best life, and we don't want to treat it like that. In
Mhm.
fact, some people, and I have gotten into arguments, and I don't particularly like this, but I've gotten into arguments with people about this. And my answer to them is this: I get the idea that you're starring in your own movie and that homeless person is playing a role, kind of like the town drunk
Mm.
in a Western, where they end up in a jail every night. And then every morning, yeah, I make this it's not a joke. Andy Griffith, right?
Mhm.
And there was the drunk.
Mm.
And then every morning he would go back out on the street. And I wanted to ask Andy Griffith, why didn't you guys help him? He's a drunk. It's eating his life away. He's going to drink himself to death. And I
Mhm.
know it's supposed to be the Andy Griffith show and not that heavy, but literally, right? That guy was playing a role in a show, in a movie, in a television show. And we don't want to assign people roles in our movie. I don't think that's the best life. And
Hmm.
so I don't accept it. And I
Yeah.
challenge people on it because we can do better. We can do better as a
Yeah.
society, do better as individuals.
Yeah. It almost sounds like sometimes we tell ourselves these stories so that we don't have to do anything about it.
Bingo. They want
Or
it
at
that
least I alleviate my guilt from not doing anything about it.
bingo. They want it that way. Why should I tell them that it's not right?
Yeah.
Because they're addicted or their mental health is in a place or they are abused in a way that they've they've become numb.
Yeah. And I think that's actually an antithesis to the cross, to Christ, because God could have just said, "Well, they want to sin and they just want to destroy themselves, so I'll just let them." Instead, He intercedes. He goes down and He steps into this to the fray.
What a concept, right? And I've just recently heard this discussion about we celebrate the cross in Christian tradition. The cross was an example of pain and suffering in the Roman. And
Mhm.
if Romans of that time knew that we made golden crosses and celebrated the cross, they'd be like, why? That would be like us celebrating a hangman's noose. This is what
Yeah,
how it
yeah,
was described.
or an electric chair or whatever,
Right. We'd be like,
Yeah,
wow, why would we do that? That's weird. I think what we really celebrate is an empty cross. I think what we celebrate is the thing after the cross. I think we celebrate the idea that the cross was not the end. And so when we look at somebody's life and we say, that's it, that's your end, you're on the street, you're just going to suffer. That's the way it is. I
yeah,
think that is so limiting to someone. We got to try better.
yeah. Well, I know we've covered a lot here. Are there any parting words of wisdom you want to share that you haven't got a chance to before we tell people a little bit more about what you do?
So all I would say to folks is don't be afraid to really examine some of these hard ideas that you have in yourself. One of the most liberating things that I have done in my life, and it came later than it should have, is I started asking myself, what am I radically wrong? And when I don't know where to look, I look at the things that I hold most dear. And I say to myself, is that true? Now I'm gonna objectively look and try to get the best information, try to think the hardest that I can about it. Often what I find is, yeah, I agree with what I hold is true. My faith is a good example. But sometimes I find I was wrong and I was radically wrong. And I learned something and I become more compassionate or empathetic or understanding,
Mhm.
but I'm not in a way just it's about me being better, right?
Yeah,
It's about now that I understand this situation in a different way, what can I do? What's the next steps I can take to help other people? That's my
yeah,
kind of like when I talk to people. And don't try to fix everything. Be
yeah,
a really good role model in the 3 feet around you. You cannot change the world by yourself, but you can be a good influence, positive influence in the 3 feet around you every day, all day long. And that will make an impact. That ripple effect will happen.
yeah. So if there's an organization that wants your help doing that, who's a good fit for working with you?
I really try to focus on those organizations that have a connection with people that means they're responsible for their safety and security. That could
Like, what would
be
be some examples? Yeah.
like a university or even a nonprofit that does like a rescue mission or a church or a business that feels responsible for its employees. And how am I going to create the best environment for their safety and security? And I'm not a security specialist in the sense of like you need to chain that door and change, do that with this,
Hmm.
windows and that kind of thing. There are people that do that. My specialty is getting with those leaders and decision makers and empowering them to make the least worst decision in the most crucial moments. Because unless you've got that skill set, you will be paralyzed. And you
Hmm.
have to learn how to make those best decisions when it's a crisis or really a
And what would be some examples of those situations and crises that people maybe think they're prepared for, but haven't really gone through the work to do what they need to respond?
Yeah, let's take a rescue mission. Imagine that you have somebody that gets into your rescue mission and starts stabbing people. Are you prepared for that? What's your security? What's the decisions that you made beforehand? Then how are you going to handle it while it's happening? And then what are you going to do after? And have you come up with a notification system? Have you, the leader, thought, what are my principled decisions that I'm going to make in this moment? That's one example of just like at a rescue mission. How do I know that? Because it happened in mine, but we were prepared and the attacker was subdued within a minute or two, arrested, is on trial because we thought about this ahead of time. And I was decisive and I told my staff in these situations, if you can't get a hold of me, do this, be prepared. Right? And they were. But when it comes to higher education, we are seeing that by the time your listeners are hearing this, they will have experienced the political violence that recently happened with a conservative speaker. And fully a third, there's an organization called FIRE, and they look at freedom of speech on campuses. And they did a study, 65,000 students. Fully a third of students on campuses today consider political violence to be an option. You as a leader, are you prepared to handle the fact that 1/3 of your students think that political violence is okay? I'm not sure that we've really thought through that very well.
Mm-hmm.
I try to build the idea that our security people, not just public safety, but leadership and student life and all the other different elements are public affairs. We have just spent too much time being what I call thermometers, just measuring the temperature of what's going on outside, to we need to change and we need to be thermostats that set the cultural temperature of our institutions. And we need to do that in a way that makes political violence to be something that is not an option in any way.
Yeah.
We have to be firm and strong about this.
Yeah.
And so coaching leadership to get to that stage is hard because there are a lot of competing interests and ideas about what's freedom and what's not. And so let's break that down as leaders, having been in that environment, having had to make the tough choice between A and B. How do I do that? Principles, humility, decisiveness, those sorts of things.
Okay. How can people connect with you? What's your website? What social media channels are you on?
So I'm on LinkedIn. There's Jack Briggs on LinkedIn. And I have this really awesome website that you helped me build. Thank you. jackbriggs.co. And you can reach out to me there and we can connect and have conversations. I am about having these conversations to help people. And if I can help you in a way, either informally or formally, that's what I'm here for, because I've had my time in the sun. I'm ready to really focus on how I can help others.
Well, Jack, thank you so much for sharing your life with us today. I'm Jason Scott Montoya, and this has been another episode of the Share Life podcast. We'll see you on the other side.
Thanks, Jason.
Are you a small business owner? Have you hit a glass ceiling where year over year, you cannot rise above a certain revenue level? Check out Jason Scott Montoya's book, The Jump, to discover how to level up your leadership and pivot your entrepreneurial passion to the highest level.